Hi everyone. We're going to look now at how to answer question 4 on paper 1. And again, I'll be using the Mr. Fisher text that you used for the assessment a few weeks ago. I'll be running through that question, so it might be good to have that piece of writing with you. So first of all, question 4. This is the one where there's a statement that you are asked whether you agree with it or not. It's worth 20 points, so it's quite a lot, and you need to spend around 20 to 25 minutes on it. Don't do it first. Some people think, well, I'm going to do that one first because it's got the most points. We don't recommend that you do that. We think that the questions build up and they lead you towards question 4. Everything you've done before that is kind of building you up for this question. You're reading and rereading the text, noticing structure, noticing language. I think it'd be quite difficult to do first, but what you must do is just be disciplined. Time yourself on the other questions and make sure you stop question 1 after 4 to 5 minutes, stop question 2 and 3 after 8 to 10 minutes, and then leave yourself plenty of time for question 4. So this is the question from Jigs and Reels, the Mr. Fisher text. It says, focus this part of your answer on the second part of the source from line 25 to the end. The student said, this part of the story where Mr. Fisher is marking homework shows Tibbet's story is better than Mr. Fisher expected, and his reaction is extreme. To what extent do you agree? In your response, you could consider your own impressions of what Mr. Fisher expected Tibbet's homework to be like, evaluate how the writer conveys Mr. Fisher's reaction to what he discovers, and support your response with references to the text. So first of all, the very first thing you must do, and you must do this, is underline the bit you're being asked to refer to or highlight it in some way. Here it's from line 25 to the end, so make sure you straight away mark that on the text. So many students come unstuck because they panic and look at the wrong part of the text. And if you refer to anything from any other part of the text, it might be absolutely brilliant. It won't get any marks, so don't do it. Do this straight away. Mark the text that you're looking at. And then here's the statement. Now, a really important thing to do as well is highlight the bits of the statement that you're being asked to respond to. So in this one, this part of the story where Mr. Fisher's marking homework, that just shows you which bit you're reading. The important bit is Tibbet's story is better than Mr. Fisher expected, and his reaction is extreme. So I've highlighted those two bits because they're the bits you're being asked to respond to. To what extent do you agree? So to what extent do you agree that Tibbet's story is better than Mr. Fisher expected, and his reaction is extreme? It says here, in your response, you could. Now, we always say, in your response, you should, because it's not really an option. You should be doing these things, considering your own impressions of what Mr. Fisher expected Tibbet's homework to be like, evaluate how the writer conveys Mr. Fisher's reaction, and support your evidence with references to the text. So we'll unravel a little bit now what these 3 bits mean. So what they essentially want you to do, first of all, find the evidence from the text. Keep focused on the statement. Explain how the evidence you've found supports this statement. Comment on what methods the writer has used. That can be anything. That can be language or structure or anything else you notice. Analyze, say why those methods are effective, and remember to stay focused on the statement. Don't go off and talk about anything else. The statement is the important thing. So first of all, you need to find the evidence in the text that supports this statement. If there's 2 parts to the statement, make sure you focus on both. So first of all, finding. Here's one I did earlier. I found a few things that made me think that Mr. Fisher wasn't expecting very much. First of all, he sets it all up. He talks about how disappointed he is generally with the work from the boys. This whole paragraph here shows that he's quite disappointed. and has learned really not to expect very much from the boys at all. In fact, the magic has run out. And then he talks about Tibbet specifically. He says, well, he's done his homework on the bus. He's not a brilliant scholar, so he's not really expecting much. And then we have this sort of preparation where Mr. Fisher's, getting down to marking his work, and it just seems like a chore. He's taking a deep breath and going, "Oh, I'm not sure I fancy it." So it feels like a bit of an ordeal, something he's got to get over and done with. So I found that evidence to support the statement that Mr. Fisher isn't expecting very much. And then this bit here talks about the second part of the statement, which is Mr. Fisher's reaction is extreme. So all of this is about Mr. Fisher's reaction. He gets a very strange sensation. He begins a tightening in his diaphragm. His breathing quickens and he begins to sweat. And then he rereads every word very slowly with meticulous care. Now, if you think a few minutes ago, he couldn't wait to get the bus and go home. So I think these statements here, these sentences here are to do with his reaction. So I found my evidence in the text. I need to focus. Oh, sorry, that was me dropping something. Now I need to focus on the statement. So I'm just start by agreeing. It's the easiest thing to do. I agree that Mr. Fisher had low expectations of Tibbet's homework. In this answer, in question 4, you are being led really to agree with this statement. You could try disagreeing, but I don't think it would really work. That the examiners are really looking for they're not looking for you to argue particularly. They're looking for you really to show how the writer has achieved certain effects. So agree with the statement. I agree that Mr. Fisher had low expectations of Tibbet's homework. And then explain how your evidence support this statement. You've found all this evidence. So even though he'd obviously done his homework on the bus, he wasn't a brilliant scholar. So we're saying Tibbet had rushed his work and Mr. Tibbet was expecting it to be very ordinary. This bit here, Tibbet took a deep breath and looked down at Tibbet's exercise book. He was really dreading reading it and just wanted it over and done with so he could go home. It was a real ordeal. And then you write that bit up. I agree that Mr. Fisher had low expectations of Tibbet's homework. We can tell this because he describes Tibbet as not a brilliant scholar who has probably done his homework on the bus. So we can tell he thinks that Tibbet is an ordinary student who hasn't taken care over his piece of work. So he's clearly not anticipating great things. He also describes taking a deep breath before reading, showing perhaps that he's dreading it and has to prepare himself mentally. So he clearly thinks reading Tibbet's work is going to be a bit of an ordeal. So I'm explaining there how this evidence shows that Mr. Fisher had low expectations of Tibbet's homework. You will remember that the question also asks you to comment on methods. So I'm looking through my statement, the evidence I found here, not a brilliant scholar, done his homework on the bus. Can't really find any obvious methods there, anything that you would call anything really obvious like a simile or a good structural feature. So I haven't really got to comment on it in this particular paragraph. What I've written there is enough. Must stick to the statement. We've got to continue focusing on the statement. And if there's a second part of the statement, you could start talking about this. So here, the second part of the statement is that Mr. Fisher's reaction is extreme, and this bit explains that Mr. Fisher's reaction is extreme. And here we're really describing quite an extreme physical reaction, something that's almost beyond Mr. Fisher's control. So I've said, I also agree that Mr. Fisher's reaction is extreme. He starts to experience a very strange sensation and a tightening in his diaphragm. This physical reaction implies that Mr. Fisher does not have control over what's happening to him, certainly unusual in a teacher reading a piece of student's work. So I'm making the case here that Mr. Fisher's reaction is extreme. I'm sticking to the statement, I'm finding evidence from the text, and I'm explaining my points. What I haven't done yet is comment on methods because I haven't really seen any. But in the next but here, I've written a little M here to show that there's methods. There's something here about sentence length. His breathing quickened, stopped, quickened again. He began to sweat. And when he reached the end of the story, Mr. Fisher put down his pen and went back to the beginning, rereading every word very slowly and with meticulous care. So there's something here about these very short, sharp sentences, followed by a nice, long, complex one. There's also something about contrast, I think, here, because if you think a paragraph before, Mr. Fisher couldn't wait to finish this piece of work and get on the bus home, and now he's rereading every word very slowly with meticulous care. So he's clearly forgotten about his bus and he's been overtaken by the reading. So I say that contrast is a method as well. So we've got two methods there. We've got sentence length and we've got contrast. So the writer goes on to describe more of this physical reaction, and she varies her sentence length, putting short, snappy sentences with long, complex ones to show the stages of astonishment that Mr. Fisher goes through. His breathing quickened, stopped, quickened again, suggests he is swiftly scanning through Tibbet's work in disbelief. This is followed by a lengthy sentence that includes the phrase rereading every word slowly and with meticulous care. This mirrors how slowly and carefully Mr. Fisher is reading Tibbet's piece. This is a sharp contrast with a few minutes earlier when he couldn't wait to finish reading the homework and get the bus home. Reading Tibbet's work has gone from being a chore to something to be savoured, an extreme change in behaviour. So again, I've sort of reminded myself that I'm talking about the extreme reaction. So I'll just put that word extreme in to remind me and the examiner that I am focusing on the statement. So I put the bits, hang on. So in yellow, I've got the to show you. Obviously, you haven't got to highlight this in the exam, but in yellow, I've put the method, sentence length and contrast. If you want to, you can disagree a bit, because remember the question says, to what extent do you agree? So you could agree, you could say, I agree to some extent, or you could say, I agree strongly, but you could also disagree a bit. So I put in a disagreeing a little bit statement at the end. However, after this initial extreme reaction, it could be argued that Mr. Fisher's reaction is rather tame, as he found himself beginning to smile, which could be described as a fairly normal way to react after reading a piece of promising work. So even though Mr. Fisher has this extreme physical reaction to start off with, all we really see is that he's smiling. So you could argue that that's not that extreme. So I put that bit in. You haven't got to, and certainly don't try and shoehorn in a disagreement if you can't see one, because it will look weird. Okay, so just to read, there's a complete answer here. I'll put in the classroom as well. And just to recap, you need to answer this question effectively, you need to find evidence from the text, focus on the statement, explain how the evidence supports the statement, comment on what methods have been used, similes, metaphors, structure, anything like that. Analyze those methods, say why they're effective, and remember to stay focused. So there, the 6 things you need to remember. You might want to say FEMAS to remind you, but that might not help. Tips for answering this question. Really, just relax. Just think, do I agree with this statement? Oh yeah, I do. Why do I agree with it? And then you find and go from there, really. Just enjoy yourself. Go with it. But mostly agree. Provide examples to back up your point. Repeat the key words from the question for each point you make. So keep saying, yes, I agree with this statement because, just to show yourself, remind yourself that you're sticking to the point and show the examiner that you're sticking to the point. Make sure you say what the method is, if there is one. So talking in any one answer, you probably only need to mention 2 or 3 methods. Feel free to use your own opinions. You can be quite free with this question. And as I said, you can also use a counter argument if you want to. Sentence starters, if you're really stuck, ways to get going. I agree that the writer, blah, 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 blah. Repeat the statement. She uses this metaphor to show that. Dialogue is introduced to show that. I agree with this statement because the reader feels blah, 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 because the writer uses blah, blah, which creates this effect on the reader. So they're just some ways to get you going if you get stuck. Your turn now. So you're going back to Sound of Thunder by Ray Bradbury, the dinosaur one. And the question is, focus this part of your answer on the second part of the source from line 31 to the end. Remember to highlight that. A student said, this part of the story where the men encounter the Tyrannosaurus Rex shows Eccles is right to panic. The monster is terrifying. There's a couple of bits there. Eccles is right to panic and the monster is terrifying. You might want to focus on both of them. To what extent do you agree? In your response, you could consider your own impressions of Eccles' reaction, evaluate how the writer describes the monster, and support your response with references to the text. So remember, you're doing these things. You're finding the evidence, focusing on the statement, explaining how it supports the statement, commenting on methods, analysing those methods, and remembering to stay focused. Good luck with that. I look forward to reading your answers.